I don't know. But I'll tell you something, Doc. You better not mess around with Nades there.
Ken Curtis will always be remembered as Festus Hagen from Gunsmoke, that raspy-voiced, quick-witted deputy who made millions of Americans laugh and care at the same time. He was one of the most beloved figures in the history of Western television. But behind that warm, familiar face was a man who carried real struggles, quiet resentments, and a personal life far more complicated than anything he ever played on screen. Before he died, he broke his silence and revealed the names of 5 people in Hollywood he deeply disliked, people who had left a lasting mark on him that he never fully shook. This is the full story of Ken Curtis, a man who was so much more than the character that made him famous. If you enjoy stories like this about the real lives of Hollywood legends, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one. We dig deep so you don't have to. Ken Curtis was born Curtis Wayne Gates on June 2, 1916, in the small town of Lamar, Colorado. Right from the beginning, his childhood was unusual in ways that most people could hardly imagine. While other kids his age were playing outside in open fields and backyards, Ken was growing up inside a jailhouse. His father, Dan Gates, worked as the sheriff of Bent County, and the family lived in a small apartment sitting directly above the jail cells. The sounds of iron bars, echoing footsteps, and heavy cell doors closing were just a normal part of daily life for young Ken. His mother, Nellie Sneen Gates, served as the cook for the jail, preparing meals not just for her family but for the prisoners too. Ken would often watch her pass food through the bars to the inmates, giving him a glimpse into a world that most children never got to see. It was a strange and unusual upbringing, but it shaped him deeply, and it brought out something in him early on. A love for music and storytelling that would eventually carry him all the way to Hollywood. When the Great Depression hit and cast a dark shadow over the entire country, dreams felt like a luxury that most families simply could not afford. Ken's parents, like many parents of that era, wanted something more stable for their son. They encouraged him to pursue a career in medicine, and so Ken enrolled at Colorado College with the goal of becoming a doctor. He gave it a genuine try, but after 2 years, he knew in his heart that it was not the right path for him. Medicine offered security, but it did not offer what he truly wanted. Music kept pulling at him no matter how hard he tried to focus on his studies. So he made a bold decision. He walked away from medical school to chase something that offered no guarantees at all. With World War II approaching and the country still finding its footing after years of economic hardship, it was a risky move by any measure. But Ken believed in himself enough to take that leap. That leap of faith began paying off in the early 1940s when Ken got a major break, an invitation to join the Tommy Dorsey Band as a vocalist. Tommy Dorsey was already a living legend at that point, leading one of the most popular and respected orchestras in the entire country. The timing was significant because Ken was stepping into a spot that had just been vacated by a young Frank Sinatra. The expectations were enormous, but Ken handled the pressure with grace. His smooth, warm voice and easy, natural charm quickly won over audiences wherever the band performed. It was during this important stretch of his career that he also made a decision that would stick with him for the rest of his life. On the advice of Tommy Dorsey himself, Curtis Wayne Gates became Ken Curtis, a sharper, cleaner name that felt built for the entertainment world. From that point forward, his professional identity was set. After making his name in the big band world, Ken discovered that his heart truly belonged to Western music. He became the lead singer for the Sons of the Pioneers, a legendary group with a devoted following and a long string of beloved radio hits. With his sincere and soulful voice, he helped bring life to timeless songs like Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky, tracks that remain connected to the golden era of American Western music. Around the same time, he also stepped into radio as the host of Chuck Wagon Jamboree, a 15-minute syndicated program produced in Los Angeles. The show ran for about 2 years and covered about 131 episodes. Each broadcast featured Ken performing Western ballads, sharing lighthearted moments with a comedy group called the Novelty Aces, and closing things out with a hymn. It was a warm, intimate format that blended music with storytelling, and looking back now, it foreshadowed exactly the kind of performer he would become on television. But even with all that success in music and radio, Ken wanted more. His charm and charisma were impossible to ignore, and by the late 1940s and into the early 1950s, he started making the transition to acting. He took on roles in Western-themed musicals and cowboy films, slowly building a foundation that would eventually make him a household name. He worked alongside some of the biggest names in Hollywood, including director John Ford, and shared the screen with legends like John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. These were not minor background appearances. Ken took on real, meaningful roles that allowed him to hold his own even among such towering figures. He also embraced smaller, lower-budget westerns and adventure films, not because they were stepping stones, but because he genuinely connected with their raw, authentic spirit. He was never chasing glamour. He was drawn to characters with grit and honesty, the kind of people audiences could believe in. All of those years of work, all those roles in film and music and radio, would eventually lead to the one part that defined everything: Festus Hager. In 1964, Ken joined the cast of Gunsmoke at a critical moment. Dennis Weaver, who had played Marshal Dillon's original deputy, Chester Good, had left the show to pursue other opportunities. Chester had been deeply loved by audiences, with his distinctive limp and his warm, humble personality. There was a very real question about whether anyone could step in and fill that space. Ken Curtis turned out to be exactly what the show needed. What was originally intended as a one-time appearance quickly turned into something much bigger. Festus, with his scratchy voice, his homespun humor, and his completely original personality, captured the hearts of viewers almost immediately. He was tough and funny at the same time, loyal without ever being sentimental, and completely unlike any character television had seen before. Ken ended up staying on Gunsmoke for more than a decade, appearing in over 300 episodes and cementing his place in television history. Behind the scenes, however, the picture was far more complicated. Before he died, Ken revealed the names of 5 people in Hollywood he had genuine issues with, and the tension between him and some of his Gunsmoke co-stars was at the very top of that list. First and most prominent was James Arness, the towering actor who had played Marshal Matt Dillon for 20 years. Arness was not just a cast member, he was the face and identity of the entire show. His presence dominated nearly every scene, and audiences adored him. For Ken Curtis, working in that shadow year after year was not always easy. Festus became hugely popular in his own right, but no matter how much fans loved him, he was always the deputy, always second to Arness's Marshal. Rumors circulated that Ken quietly hoped Festus would one day receive the same level of recognition as Dillon, but the spotlight almost never shifted. Whether the frustration was as deep as people suggested is hard to say for certain, but the tension was acknowledged by those who knew both men. Then there was Milburn Stone, the veteran actor behind the sharp and gruff Doc Adams. Stone had been with Gunsmoke from the very beginning, and he carried a quiet but powerful sense of ownership over the show and his role in it. Ken joined years after the show had already found its rhythm, walking into a cast that was already tightly established. Behind the scenes, it was said that Stone and Curtis did not always see eye to eye, with disagreements reportedly arising around scripts and screen time. Both men had strong personalities, which made clashes almost inevitable. And yet, when they shared the screen together, the tension somehow made their scenes feel more alive and real. John Mantley, the longtime producer of Gunsmoke, was another name on Ken's list. Mantley was known for running things tightly, strict with budgets, demanding about scripts, and not particularly open to actors pushing for more creative control. As Festus grew into one of the show's most beloved characters, Ken began to feel that he deserved more screen time, more say in how his character developed, and fairer pay. The two reportedly clashed more than once over these issues, with Ken pushing for Festus to take on a more central role in Dodge City, while Mantley resisted. Unlike some of the other rumored tensions, this one seemed grounded in real, observable conflict that people on set noticed and remembered. Amanda Blake, who played the iconic Miss Kitty, also found a place on that list. Blake had been one of the show's brightest and most beloved stars for years, and her portrayal of the strong, independent saloon owner was central to everything Gunsmoke represented.
But as Festus grew more popular with audiences, quiet whispers began to surface suggesting that Blake was not entirely comfortable with how much attention Ken's character was drawing. Some felt she worried the growing spotlight on Festus was pulling recognition away from her own well-established role. Whether those whispers were grounded in reality or mostly exaggerated by tabloids and fan gossip is difficult to know for certain. What is clear, though, is that whatever existed between them off-camera never once made it onto the screen. Their on-screen chemistry was effortless and warm, which speaks to the professionalism both of them brought to their work. Finally, there was Dennis Weaver himself. Even though Weaver had left Gunsmoke long before many of the tensions arose, his ghost lingered in a very real way. Weaver had created Chester Good, a character so beloved that his departure left a genuine void. When Ken stepped in as Festus, the comparisons were immediate and relentless. Audiences measured every scene against what Weaver had done, and some say Ken carried that invisible weight more heavily than he ever let on publicly. As Weaver went on to build a successful career beyond Gunsmoke, his presence in the minds of longtime viewers never fully faded. There were quiet suggestions that Ken may have felt a degree of resentment over that lasting legacy. Over time, though, Festus carved out his own identity so completely that the comparisons faded naturally. Filling those shoes had never been easy, but Ken managed to do it in a way that was entirely his own. Away from the professional tensions, his personal life told its own complicated story. Ken was married 3 times in total. His first marriage was to Lorraine Page in 1943, during the uncertain early years of his career when the entertainment world and the war were both pulling people in unpredictable directions. The marriage ended without children, and those close to them later suggested that their careers simply took them in different directions. His second marriage drew considerably more public attention because of who he chose to marry. In 1952, Ken married Barbara Ford, the daughter of the legendary director John Ford, the very man he had been working closely with on several successful Western films. Becoming part of the Ford family brought prestige, but also pressure. The marriage lasted more than a decade, but the strain of fame, Ken's deep commitment to Gunsmoke, and the different paths both of them were walking eventually became too much. They divorced quietly in 1964 without public drama or scandal.
Then, just 2 years later, he met Toria Hearn Connolly, the woman who would finally bring lasting peace into his life. Toria had no connection to Hollywood and no interest in fame or the entertainment industry. She was warm, grounded, and completely sincere, someone who saw Ken not as a television star, but simply as a man. Their relationship grew in a quiet, natural way, built not on public appearances or industry events, but on road trips, dinners at home, fishing trips, long drives across the country, and visits to small-town Western festivals. Ken often spoke of his life with Toria as one of his greatest blessings. Although they never had children together, family was central to their life. Toria had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Ken embraced the role of a devoted and caring father figure with genuine warmth and patience. After Gunsmoke finally ended, Ken stepped away from the fast pace of television and chose a quieter life. He took on smaller roles and meaningful projects without chasing the spotlight. One of his last notable appearances came in a short-lived NBC drama called The Yellow Rose, and his final film role arrived in 1991 when he appeared alongside Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross in a television movie based on a Louis L'Amour story. He played an aging stagecoach driver, and he brought the same quiet, understated authenticity to the role that had defined every performance of his career. Perhaps one of the most telling moments of his later years came in 1987 when CBS announced a Gunsmoke reunion film called Return to Dodge. Fans naturally expected Ken to appear as Festus, but he was nowhere in the film when it aired. The reason, it turned out, was straightforward. Negotiations over his salary collapsed. Ken felt the offer was unacceptably low for a character as central to the show's legacy as Festus had been. Rather than accept what he felt was an insult after more than a decade of dedication, he chose to walk away. He never made a public statement about it or sought sympathy. He simply let his absence speak for itself. On April 28, 1991, Ken Curtis passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74 after suffering a heart attack. He was at home in Clovis, California, with Toria beside him. His passing was quiet and without warning, a gentle end to a life that had always been lived with dignity and restraint. Honoring his wishes, his ashes were scattered across the open lands of Colorado, near the small town where his story had first begun. It was a fitting farewell for a man who had always carried the true spirit of the American West within him, not the romanticized myth of it, but the real version, steady, resilient, deeply rooted in family, faith, and hard work, and humble enough to never let fame change who he truly was.